Crazy. Well, I'm glad you guys made it here safe. Didn't get blown away by the wind. We actually had a power outage at the church today, and so we're going to hope that doesn't happen again, but if it does, just heads up. Bear with me, okay? Praying it doesn't, but if God does something crazy, just letting you know now. Letting you know now. So tonight we're continuing in our series, Your New Playlist. And if you were with us last week, I'll give you a recap, or if this is your first week here, I'll let you know what we're doing. We're just talking about soundtracks that we play in our head. Maybe those repetitive ones on a day-to-day basis that are negative or not super helpful. And we're just trying to figure out how to rewire those soundtracks into a playlist that's going to be more positive in our head and more glorifying to God. And Tony kicked us off last week with the first soundtrack on the playlist, which was Emotions Are a Tool to Worship, Not to Be Worshipped. And he talked all about how sometimes we can kind of put our emotions on a pedestal, or we can really just get caught up so much in our emotions that we end up worshiping them more or looking to them more and feeling them more than we do when we're worshiping God. And instead of looking to our emotions, we can look to God in those emotions, and we can use them as a tool to be worshiped and bring them before God. And then the second soundtrack that he added to our playlist was Reject Thoughts That Are Not Helpful, Kind, and True. And this was just such a good reminder. Simple statement that kind of just sticks in your head to reject thoughts that are not helpful, kind, and true. And I want to let you guys know, as we're going through this series, if you follow us on Instagram, you'll notice that we're actually building our own playlist. And so I'll have a graphic every single week for you guys that has the different soundtracks that we're adding to it. And then if y'all are on Spotify, we're actually building a playlist so that you guys can be listening to songs throughout the week and filling your mind with these soundtracks. We started by adding the first 4 songs on there that actually go with the soundtracks from last week. And so if you wanted to follow that playlist, we're going to be adding to it every single week after the message. You can scan that Spotify code, or you can go to the link in our bio on Instagram, and you can find it there. We'd love to have you guys follow along. These songs are actually specifically picked to go along with the message and to help reinforce those soundtracks in your heads. So tonight, we're going to be adding to our playlist, and we're going to be talking about criticism and comparison. Before we even get into that, I want to talk to you guys about a little bit of an embarrassing story for me where I thought people were just critiquing me like crazy, and I couldn't stop comparing myself. So, flashback. Little Grace, little Lindsay, there she is. I don't know where she is. She's not in the room anymore. Flashback to little us in college in our cutie little matching outfits for, us just trying to be cute. This was probably one of our first days at Lancaster Bible College. We were both musical theater majors. And the fact that I'm even in a picture at LBC is kind of crazy because I did not think I would be standing there. And let me tell you why. I was a musical theater major to start. I know, crazy. I don't look like a theater kid, but I was. And I started out as a musical theater major, and to be a musical theater major, you have to audition at colleges to get into their program. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to go audition at LBC. It's going to be great, whatever. And so my name right now is Grace Jones, but my maiden name used to be Grace DeBuse, and that's important because we're going to get to that in a minute. So I walk into my audition, and I'm really nervous, and I'm really scared, and in front of me is literally the entire faculty of the musical theater department, and they're not just any faculty, they're kind of important names. Some of these people have been on tour for Broadway, some of these people have graduated from really prestigious programs, some big wigs. And I'm like, okay, can't mess this up, whatever. And they're like, okay, state your name. And I'm like, Grace DeBuse. And now my whole life, no one's been able to pronounce my last name. And I go, it kind of rhymes with abuse. Guys, when I tell you, I wanted to run so fast out of that room as they all looked at me and kind of gave me that to this entire faculty of really prestigious people, really Christian, godly people. I'm like, yeah, my last name, it reminds me of abuse. That's how you can remember it. No, absolutely not. That was not the smartest thing to do. Then I go on to do my song, and I absolutely butcher the first half of it, so much so that they're like, take a deep breath. Why don't you start over? Guys, if you're not in theater, you don't know how that feels to be like, why don't you start over? The most embarrassing moment of my entire life, I'm pretty sure. So I walk out of that room, and I'm feeling like these people are critiquing me so hardcore. They're never going to want me in this program. All I can think of is critiques from them and critiques from myself. And then I have to go on, and I have to like watch other people do really well. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to be a great dancer like they are. Oh my goodness, that person didn't even mess up their last name. Look how great they are. And I'm just like playing this comparison game so much all day. Turns out I was really in my head, because I ended up getting accepted into the school. Crazy, never thought that would happen. And I ended up getting a scholarship. And so the Lord was kind of like, okay, girlfriend, like, relax. It wasn't as bad as you think it was. But that was a moment for me that I was like, oh my goodness. These soundtracks in my head were so strong that I could not believe anything else. And I think we all have these moments of criticism and comparison, like these repeating soundtracks, like, oh my goodness, like this person must think this of me, or I think this of myself, or oh my goodness, that person is so much better than I am. I wish I could be like them. And these repeating soundtracks can be really difficult to break. Now, as someone who is a recovering people pleaser, I can empathize with that statement more than anything, because I have tried my whole life to try and get ahead of these repeating soundtracks. And it's a process. It's not just like overnight you wake up and you're confident and suddenly there's nobody in the world that can get you down. It is hard to not have these repeating ones in our head. And the thing is, more often than not, kind of like my story, the soundtracks aren't even fully accurate. The ones that we're playing in our head aren't even necessarily true. I mean, there might be some truth to them, and we'll get into that later about when critiques about us are right or wrong or not. But oftentimes, we make them a lot bigger in our head than they are. And if we're not playing a criticism soundtrack from someone else or ourselves, then we're probably playing a comparison one and vice versa. These can be so hard to escape. And it can kind of look like this. These comparison and criticism soundtracks, they kind of get triggered by these things. So like say you saw someone's post on Instagram and suddenly you're either critiquing them and you're like, ooh, why would that person post that? Or maybe you start critiquing yourself and you're like, man, I'm not Christian enough. I'm not posting the Bible enough on my story. Or maybe you see their post and you're like, wow, they just look like they have their life all together. Comparing and critiquing soundtracks. Maybe you look at someone doing better than you on the field, on the court, on stage, in the classroom, with an instrument, whatever it may be. Kind of like how I was looking at these people at my audition and thinking, they're doing so much better than me. I will never be able to be like that. I must just be the worst in the world. Maybe you hung out at their house with their seemingly perfect family. Let me break it to you right now, no family is perfect, but sometimes when you're hanging out at someone's house for a couple hours, it can kind of look like their family has it all together. And you can kind of be playing this comparison game of like, well, my family doesn't sit down and eat dinner together. My family doesn't pray together. My family doesn't go to church and have a good time together. Or maybe you're critiquing them. Man, my friend's parents fight all the time. That must suck. I wonder what that's like. So these comparison and critiquing soundtracks. Maybe you see someone who says they love Jesus, but they aren't acting like it. And you start to play those critiquing soundtracks in your head of like, yikes, like if they say they love Jesus, I want to be doing that if I were them. Do they really love Jesus? Or maybe you're comparing to someone who acts like they love Jesus and you don't know their whole story, but what you see, you think that you need to be just like them. And so tonight I kind of want to just remind you guys that when we quiet our own critique, we learn to listen and we celebrate instead of compare. We can live a life free of people-pleasing soundtracks and one that is rooted in who we are in Christ. And so for our first soundtrack number 3 on the playlist, I want to start with criticism. And this soundtrack is people in the game always get criticized by people in the stands. So I wanted to think about, okay, who's a great example of someone who handled criticism really, really well in the Bible? And I know it's the Sunday school answer, but we're going to talk about Jesus tonight because I think that he is the best example for how he handled criticism. Because, guys, Jesus experienced a lot of criticism for like being the most perfect person on earth and literally the Messiah. He got a lot of flack for things that he did. And so I was looking through some different things like, okay, what did Jesus get criticized by? What were things that people were thinking of him? Guys, people literally thought the Son of God and called him a demon. Like, he was criticized being called the exact opposite of what he was. They called him insane. They called him a drunkard, a friend of sinners, simply because they saw a little piece of his life and he was sitting with them and caring for them. They said he was out of his mind. They said he was a blasphemer and was speaking blasphemy. And so sometimes we have critiques from other people like, oh, maybe you should do this a little differently or whatever. But Jesus was out here dealing with some pretty tough critiques. He was literally being called demon, blasphemer, all of these things. And we see one of these moments in Mark 6:3. And so he was teaching, and these people came up and they scoffed. He's just a carpenter, the son of Mary and the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon. And his sisters live right here among us. They were deeply offended and refused to believe in him. So these people are coming up. They don't know that much about Jesus except that he is teaching truth and that he is saying he is the Son of God. And they're like, he's just a carpenter. Like, first of all, if there were any carpenters in the room watching this, they were probably like, excuse me, carpentry is actually pretty cool, thank you very much. Don't be dogging on our profession. So they probably were a little offended by that. Then they're like, he's just the son of Mary and brother of James, Joseph, and Judas, and Simon. And I could imagine being the brothers and being like, whoa, don't bring us into this, okay? Like, don't be just ragging on us just because he's our brother. And Mary's probably like, I pushed out the Son of God, and you guys are coming after me? Come on. And his sisters who live right here with us, bringing all the family in, just kind of being like, this guy's the average Joe. What are we talking about here? And they were so deeply offended and refused to believe in him. And Jesus kind of goes on there to be kind of offended by this and say like how he was like surprised and shocked by their lack of faith. And although he dealt with so many different critiques, I think one of the most beautiful moments of Jesus dealing with criticism was right before the cross. And so in Matthew 27:11-14, we see Jesus standing before Pilate right before his crucifixion. And the verse says, now Jesus was standing before Pilate, the Roman governor. And he asked, are you the king of the Jews? And the governor asked him, and Jesus replied, you have said it. So he didn't come out and being like, of course I'm the king of the Jews. Have you not seen the things that I have done? Have you not heard the Father say I'm the Son who he's well pleased? He didn't come out defensive. He didn't come out all these things. He just said, you have said it. And he was confident in that. He was confident in the truth. And he didn't need to say any more. Because Jesus knew whose he was. He knew he was the Son of God. He knew. And his character was already spoken for because of how he followed after his Father. He didn't have to go out and be defensive. He was confident in whose he was, and his character was able to be spoken for because of that. And then he handles it even more different than I think oftentimes we handle criticism. Well, we get defensive and we want to be like, whoa, what are you talking about? All these things. This is how Jesus handled it. When the leading priests and the elders made their accusations against him, Jesus remained silent. Now, if we're being honest, guys, if you've ever been critiqued by someone, the last thing you probably want to do is remain silent. Unless you're like really thinking about it and getting really upset and then you just go crawl in a corner and cry like sometimes I do when someone critiques me. But like, let's be honest, your first initial thing is to be defensive. But instead, Jesus remained silent. And so they were confused. They're like, don't you hear all these charges they're bringing against you? But Jesus made no response to any of the charges. And this was much to the governor's surprise. Because the governor, he's probably seen so many different criminals before where he charges them with something and they're like, hold on, I'm not guilty. I didn't do this. What are you talking about? What are these things? And here's Jesus, who people are literally hurling insults at him, telling him, critiquing him left and right, and he remains silent. And I think that we can learn a lesson from this. Because there are going to be moments when others say things about us, or even we say things about ourselves. Maybe someone else isn't critiquing us. Maybe we're self-critiquing, and sometimes that can be worse than other people. Sometimes we can be meaner to ourselves than other people can be mean to us. And so there are going to be moments when that happens. We need to ask ourselves, are we willing to be silent because we're confident in the truth? Are we willing to just be okay with what is happening because we're so confident in whose we are and we're so confident in what is true? So there's some applicational things that kind of go with criticism. And I want to encourage you guys because I think with every critique is an opportunity. So whether someone is critiquing you or you're critiquing yourself, they could be right, they could be wrong, but there's still an opportunity there. Whether that's an opportunity to say, okay, I need to humble myself, and I need to learn from this, and I need to take step forward to change this, or it's an opportunity to say, this person is not speaking truth into my life, so I'm going to step away. There is an opportunity that comes with every single criticism you're going to experience in life. You need to remind yourself that you don't know the full picture. And so kind of going back to that game analogy, the person watching you may not know how hard you trained. Someone who is just watching you do your life for the first time, they're not going to know what you've been through. They don't know the whole picture. But in the same way, you don't know what they walked in with when they sat down. You don't know where that critique is coming from. You don't know the life experiences that they've had. You don't know why they're pulling this. Maybe they had the worst day of their life. Maybe their parents were fighting all day and they see you with your perfect family, and now they just are envious and jealous of what you have, so they throw a critique or they throw something mean at you. You don't know what someone's walked in with, and they don't know what you've been through either, and so you have to pause and remember that you don't know the full picture. There's going to be moments when people may be right or wrong, but we're only going to figure that out if we pause and truly listen and ready our hearts. Because it's all about the heart posture at the end of the day. If someone is giving us a critique, we have the opportunity to control our reaction. We can't control their critique, we can only control our reaction to it. So how do we take a moment to pause and listen? Tony Villafane, the man, the myth, the legend himself, said this the other day when we were talking through this. Be humble enough to receive a criticism when it is right, but be confident enough to receive a criticism when it's wrong. And that's kind of going with that humble confidence. You need to be humble enough to receive something when someone is telling you that you are doing something wrong. But you also need to be willing to be confident enough that when you know whose you are and what you're doing is true and accurate and right, you can be confident if they're wrong. And then the last one that we can learn from Jesus is that he remained persistent in doing God's business, and we should as well. Galatians 1:10 says, obviously, I'm not trying to win the approval of people, but of God. If pleasing people were my goal, I would not be Christ's servant. And I think that's really, really convicting, because how often do we go trying to please different people? But if we're truly Christ's servant, our eyes should be so fixed on him that it doesn't matter what the world has to say about us. And so that's kind of our criticism soundtrack. And now I want to talk about the comparison one. And that celebrating brings more life than comparing. And so I was kind of reading through some different articles about comparison and how we can get out of the trap of that. And I came across one by Jordan Raynor, and if you don't know who he is, he's an author. He wrote a really good children's book, The Creator in You, and he did a whole talk on it recently that I had listened to. He's a great author, 10 out of 10 recommend. But he said this, and this, knife to the heart, because I was like, oh my goodness. Our tendency is to weigh ourselves against others until we feel improperly superior or inferior to them. Our tendency is to weigh ourselves against others until we feel improperly superior to them or inferior to them. Guys, that goes back to what I was saying about how often we feed ourselves these ideas that we kind of like can blow it out of proportion in our head that it's not even true anymore. We'll be weighing ourselves to the people around us so much that we have to go either way because we're trying to make ourselves feel better. So we're either improperly comparing ourselves to feel superior to them, like, well, at least that's not me. Well, at least that I did better than them today. At least my Jesus walk is better. At least my whatever it may be is better. At least I have it all together somewhat. Or the complete other side until we feel improperly inferior to them, which can look like, I will never be as good as them. Why even try? I just might as well just stay here because I don't think I'm ever going to reach the potential that I'm trying to reach. And I think that often we can either fall into either one of these categories. And I'd be curious to wonder which category you find yourself falling into more? Do you find yourself weighing yourself to be improperly superior and trying to build up your pride? Or do you go the other way and knock yourself down until you feel inferior? Proverbs 14:30 kind of goes along with some of this strong language that Jordan Rayner is using. He says, "A heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones." Rots them. When we are envious of others, guys, I don't know if you've ever felt it, like a physical not good feeling. I don't know how many times you've ever been envious of someone and have come out on the other side feeling good. Like, think about it. Think of a time when you were jealous or envious of someone. How did you feel after? Were you like, oh, I feel so great now that I have thought about everything in the world that I don't have or I want and that I'll never be? Absolutely not. I can tell you from experience, I have never come out of doom scrolling from Instagram feeling better about myself, ever. It's never brought life to me to scroll through things that I wish that I was. It's never brought life to me to sit and watch my friend do their life and be envious of them instead of celebrating them. And that's what Proverbs 14:30 is trying to say, that a heart at peace not only gives life to the body in a way of mentally and emotionally and spiritually, but physically too. And when we have this envy, it can rot our bones. So I want to give you guys some tangible ways to kind of fight that comparison trap. And I'm just going to warn you, they're going to feel a little cheesy. They're going to feel like you've heard it before. But from speaking from experience, if you can lean into these, they're actually helpful. If you can get past like, oh, I've heard that a million times, and lean into it, this can change the soundtracks in our head. And the first one, practicing gratitude. It is a lot easier to reject comparison when you are just thankful for what you have, because you got nothing to compare. You're just thankful for what you have. The Lord woke you up today. The Lord gave you good things today. Practicing this literally will change your life. My really great friend Ashley gave me a book once, and it was a gratitude journal. And I can't even tell you the different days that I've had when I've actually sat down with that gratitude journal and filled out the things of like, these are the little things that happened today that that I can be grateful for. And the days that I've just moved on and been kind of anxious or frustrated or wishing that I had something else in my life, or wishing I was something else, or wishing I was further in life, or whatever it may be. The next one is focus on your strengths. We are all different, and that is okay. It is okay to be different. Too often, I think we look at other people and we're like, oh my gosh, they're so better than me. No, they're not better than you. They're just different than you. This is something that my husband tells me all the time because, trust me, I fall into this comparison trap way too often. And he's like, listen. Why are we fighting? Why are we fighting about this? I'm not better than you. We're just different, and that's okay. That is okay because we need different. Dan needs to have his strengths and I need to have mine, or else our house would not function if we were the same person. So it's okay to be different. This past Sunday, Pastor Scott used this verse that has kind of just been stuck in my head because I think it is such a beautiful picture of the church and such a beautiful picture of how we should be living together. God's purpose in all of this was to use the church to display his wisdom in its rich variety to all the unseen rulers and authorities in heavenly places. It's his purpose, his wisdom, to use variety. Because we need variety. People are going to experience things different with other people. Someone's going to be able to relate to you, and someone's going to be able to relate to the experiences of your friends, and that's okay. We need to celebrate and focus on our strengths. And with that, we need to celebrate others too, because it gives a lot more life to be celebrating other people than it does to be focusing on ourselves. And that can be hard. How many times have you been out playing soccer and with your friend on your team maybe, and you see them score a winning goal, and the first thing you want to do is be like, man, I wish I scored that winning goal. Okay, you're going to walk off the field feeling defeated. But what if you celebrated with that person instead and said, oh my goodness, I am so excited for my friend who just scored that winning goal, and because of that, our team had victory. Or what would it look like if you were experiencing, maybe your grades and things like that, and you saw your friend ace a test, and you didn't, and you were starting to feel bad about yourself, but instead, you celebrated that person, and maybe even asked that person to be like, hey, I noticed that strength in you. Can you come alongside and help me too? And then the next applicational thing in trying to beat this comparison trap, figure out your triggers. Because let me tell you, you can do all those things, the first three things, and you are still going to have moments where you fall into this trap. I have been trying for 22 years of my life to get out of the comparison trap. And there are still days when I fall into it. And so there are ways that you can help yourself in those moments of weakness by figuring out what those triggers may be. And maybe if stuff isn't really great in your family right now and you know that your other friend has a seemingly perfect life going on, maybe you just need to not hang out at their house so much. Maybe you just need to hang out with them outside of it for a little bit. For me, one of my personal ones is I have people muted on Instagram. Don't worry, none of y'all. I love you all to death. It's not you guys. But I do. I have people muted on Instagram because I know where I start to cycle into these spirals of soundtracks. And I know that if I continue to doom scroll on that person's profile, it's not like they've done anything wrong. I just know my own weaknesses. I know my triggers. I know what I can and can't doom scroll on. And so I have people muted on Instagram. And so there may be different triggers that you may have that puts you into that spiral. So figure out what those are and have grace with yourself while you're figuring it out. And then the last one, I think, is so key to beating this trap. And that's find others you can truly be vulnerable with. Because oftentimes we want to act like we have it all together. We don't want to be vulnerable. No one wants to be vulnerable. Everyone wants to be the person who has it all together. But when the comparison stuff really started changing for me was when I was able to find people that I could be truly vulnerable with about my struggles, about my weaknesses. And not gonna lie, it feels kind of nice when someone else experiences and tells you about their troubles too. It makes you feel a little less alone when you realize that somebody else doesn't have their life all together. And this isn't to say that you should go right up to your friend and be like, so, how'd you fail today? Can we talk about that? No, you don't need to go up to every single person asking how they failed. You don't need to go up and be like, so what's your weakness? No, you don't need to do that. And that's not me saying that you should go to literally every single person you ever meet and be like, hey, my name is Grace, let me tell you how I failed today. Not that either. But finding that balance of being in a group or having friends that you truly can be vulnerable with and trust is life-changing. Some of my closest, deepest friendships have come from those moments where we have been broken and vulnerable with each other, and it makes you feel so much less alone. Because I guarantee, if you look around at any single person in this room right now, they don't have it all together either. And we're all figuring this out, and going through life is going to be a lot easier when we are willing to be humble enough to admit that to ourselves and to others. And we'll be able to experience freedom from those comparison traps when we can start acknowledging whose we are in Christ, but also acknowledging that we are broken sinners in need of a Savior just like the next guy. And so I wanted to close this out in prayer, but before you do that, I want to give you guys a little challenge. And if you were here on the weekend this past Sunday, you heard Pastor Scott talking about this. It's a Make Every Effort 24-day guided prayer journal. And so for when we talked about this on Sunday, there's 24 days left in January, but it's really not about the end of the January. It's just about 24 days. And in this prayer journal are different prompts every single day, and it's literally just to help guide you through prayer. Because I think prayer is a really good place to start when we're trying to beat these soundtracks in our head. And I would really challenge you guys to either take one of these physical ones, we have them in the back, or we have it on the app that we talked about during announcements that you could fill out. And I would challenge you guys, challenge yourself to do this for the next 24 days. Spend time in intentional prayer. I guarantee you're going to come out a lot different than when you started. And so, like I said, we have this on the app. If you are more of a digital person, you want to download it, it's on the app, it's easily accessible. If you're more of a pen and paper person, totally understand, I took one myself. We will have physical copies in the back, but we don't have a ton of them. And so if you're going to take a physical copy, use it as your commitment to be doing this. So that we want them available for people who really want to use them. So if you're going to take one, make sure you're going to really commit to it. And then we do have a little something for people who really want to commit to this. So say you take one, you really commit to the next 24 days of intentional prayer. If you bring your finished one back to Tony and I, we want to say, hey, we love to see that you really pushed yourself and challenged yourself. and we'll have a little something for you. So I would love to just encourage you guys, do it for you, do it for Jesus. Don't do it for whatever's at the end of the rainbow, but we will have something for you at the end of the rainbow because we think it's important. We think it's important that you're spending time in prayer, and we want to encourage you guys. And so ask your leader. Maybe they're doing it. I know that I'm going to be doing it, so we can do it together. If you want an accountability buddy, hit me up. We can text each other each day. Be like, hey, did you do your prayer journal? Did you talk with Jesus today? Be like, hey, yeah, thanks for letting me know. So I'd love to encourage you guys to do that on your way out. So I'm going to pray us out, and then I will dismiss you guys. Dear Jesus, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here tonight. Thank you that we can be in a room of people who we know is going through the same things as we are sometimes. And that they're a group that we can be okay not being who we want to be in this moment, or we can be okay being broken, or we can be okay with our strengths. I pray that as we go over the next 24 days, but also just into 2024, that you would bless this year and help us pursue you more and more. In your name, amen. And so, as always, if you check your QR codes, there's some scanny-doos for a Connect card if you want more prayer, more of that. 11th grade, 10th grade, 9th grade girls, I believe you're on chairs. So at the end of when everyone's done in small group, you're on chairs. You guys are dismissed. Love you guys.